Entering the field of education. In September 1976, I was elected to the National Assembly and formally asked to serve as Education Minister for the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. One day that autumn, I met for the first time with the deputy ministers and department heads of the ministry. My friends had joked with me. "Sister," they said, "you've landed in an ant's nest." Those deputy ministers are formidable. Perhaps these views added to my own apprehension about this assignment. I approached the ministry as if I were a solitary warrior riding her horse into a strange battlefield. I was determined to do my best and decided that whatever transpired would be fine. Nguyen Van Nguyen, a prominent Vietnamese intellectual, had served as minister for many years. He had passed away more than a year before, leaving behind 3 deputy ministers, Vo Phuan No, Ho Chu, and Nguyen Can Tuan. Comrades No and Truck had been at the ministry for many years, while Comrade Tone had just been promoted. At that time, the Ministry of Education was located at 19 Le Ton Tong in a large French design building, which had previously been the administration building for the Hanoi Medical and Pharmaceutical University. A year after my arrival, 2 other deputy ministers were appointed. Bui Ton Kiat, a high-level political officer of the People's Liberation Army from the Ho Chi Minh City's military administration, and Comrade Nguyen Gong Neek Dam, rector of Thanh Nguyen University. That day of my first staff meeting, nearly 20 comrades from the senior leadership and various departments greeted me in the ministry's large room on the 2nd floor. My first words came from my heart. "I'm here on assignment from the party. I can't possibly address most matters as well as you comrades. I will try my best to hold your ideas in high esteem. But in the end, I must make decisions and bear the responsibility. I hope you comrades will be supportive." I think this reasonable and modest statement touched their sense of comradeship. Actually, the reality veered away from the jokester's predictions. My ministry comrades were accustomed to friendly, collegial, professional relationships. In particular, Comrade Ho Truck, party secretary at the ministry for many years. Comrade Le Huyen, head of the organization department. Comrade Nguyen Minh Quang, head of the administration department, and others helped me a great deal during my first days. Each person in the ministry's leadership had his own idiosyncrasies, strengths, and weaknesses, yet everyone worked together as a united group. As a result, even though leading the Ministry of Education was a complex assignment, I could complete my responsibilities because I had these colleagues' assistance. In general, during my time as Minister of Education, I met no resistance or conflict worth noting within the ministry. The difficulty lay in the work's heavy weight and the fact that every aspect of that assignment was entirely new for me. I tried my very best, according to the lesson I'd been taught during childhood. Whenever you accept a task, decide to complete it as best you can. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. After liberation, like other state branches, the Ministry of Education had to implement its management across the entire country. Education was a huge ministry. The 2 regions had used different educational systems for 20 years. Public education in the former North was 10 years in length, while it was 12 years in the former South. The curriculum and textbooks were different. In particular, the 2 regions had different levels of material covered in each grade. Despite the cruel war, the educational system in the former North had developed markedly. At that time, shortly after the war ended, everyone spoke of the Socialist Garden's 2 most beautiful flowers, education and health. Friends from other countries admired Vietnam's achievements in eradicating illiteracy and developing its educational system for the people's cultural attainment and professional capacity. We called our soldiers educated troops since, at that time, youth joining the Army had finished 7th grade or above. However, in the former South, schools have been developed only in the cities and in scattered areas along the national highways. The level of illiteracy was very high. Our first responsibility was to unify the ministry's management system quickly, while simultaneously developing education in the southern provinces, particularly in remote areas without schools. We organized a major mobilization to send northern teachers to support the southern provinces. We thought of this move as modeled on the march to the south in previous years. During 1977 and 1978, several thousand teachers from northern provinces answered the ministry's appeal and volunteered to serve in southern provinces. Nguyen and Ha Tinh provinces sent the largest number of teachers to work in the former South. At the end of July 1977, I went on an inspection tour in the Mekong Delta. I traveled from the middle of Dong Thap Muoi province down to Kien Giang and Sa Mau and saw for myself the presence of many northern teachers. The senior party leaders and local administrators were delighted, but some people also spoke frankly, saying, "These teachers are very dedicated, but some of them speak with Nay and Ha Tinh and Quang Binh accents. At first, the children can't understand them." I met with the teachers and encouraged them to speak slowly and adjust their accents. Not only teachers, but also management staff went south. We were fortunate that many southern students had come to the north for training during the war. They had matured during their years working in northern provinces. They returned to their southern home provinces. With their help, setting up an educational framework in southern provinces was less difficult. After 2 years, we finished establishing the management system across the country. About 5 years later, by 1983, the Ministry of Education had a network of public schools in every southern province, district, and commune. Other major initiatives included eradicating illiteracy among workers and supplementing cultural education for staff and youth. We completed the Light of Culture campaign across the former South on February 28, 1978, with illiteracy eradicated among 94% of people in the program. This success followed the high-level party leaders' directives, but it also stemmed from the participation of the entire ministry, the educational administration, and the people. The complementary work, supplementing cultural education for staff, was completed at the same time. We worked with great effort to improve the quality of preschools for children entering the public schools. We built schools in remote and mountainous areas, improved the curriculum and pedagogy for teaching the youngest of our children, and established much-needed policies for teachers and management staff. Asterisk. After I joined the Ministry of Education, I saw early on that I must concentrate on teacher training, for this was the engine of education and the source of an educational system's strength and quality. In 1946, Uncle Ho had established a system for teacher education when our country still faced extreme difficulties. Even during the resistance war against French colonialism, and then during the resistance war against American imperialism, the North organized pedagogical schools from the central level to the regions and provinces, and then continued widening that system. On the central level, we had the Hanoi Pedagogical University, the first university built during that period. It trained teachers up to standard and graduated many scientists who served in research institutes as well as in party and state offices. At that time, the state budget was severely limited, yet demands were huge. The Hanoi Pedagogical University and the pedagogical universities in Binh, Nguyen, and other sites were hard-pressed for financial resources to support students' learning and living. We had an expression, "Eat like begging monks, live like prisoners." In particular, we concentrated on establishing pedagogical schools to train teachers on site. For this task, we once again assigned staff and teachers from our northern normal schools. We began by building normal schools for elementary school teachers. After a time, we built colleges for secondary school teachers. Finding staff and teachers for normal schools was difficult, as was the task of finding students to become teachers. The need to develop teachers for elementary and secondary schools was pressing. In many localities, we train people for just 1 or 2 years to a 7th grade level, but sometimes only to a 5th grade level. Those teachers then taught up to their same levels. We called this rice dipped in rice. Later, teachers who had been trained in this abbreviated way received additional education to bring them up to appropriately higher levels. Unfortunately, some teachers could not manage the additional study required, thus affecting the quality of public school teaching in many localities during subsequent years. Gaolang, Dong That province had the first higher-level normal school in the Mekong Delta. This model school graduated many classes of secondary school teachers who served Dong Thap and other neighboring provinces. In general, students didn't want to attend pedagogical school. They had a saying, "Only a rat at the end of its tether enters pedagogical school." I visited the Hanoi Pedagogical University's dining hall and immediately felt uneasy. The student situation was impossible. They had to eat standing up, for there were no chairs. Each table had a pot of rice, a dish of salted vegetables, and a bowl of pilotless soup. Each student had a bowl and spoon. That's how they ate. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Our country faced a period of serious socio-economic crisis between liberation of the South in April 1975 and renovation in late 1986. The government worried constantly about providing our people with food. Then, in the midst of our economic difficulties came the genocidal Pol Pot regime's attacks from Cambodia into the southwest of Vietnam. The Cambodian Liberation Front appealed to us for help. Vietnamese soldiers once again volunteered. And then, in February 1979, China attacked our northern border to teach Vietnam a lesson. But what mistake had we made? I visited a number of northern provinces, Quang Ninh, Hong Lin Sun, and so on. I saw our ravaged cities and our people suffering. The invading Chinese had destroyed Lang Son province's tertiary school. I was so moved to see our youth zealously setting off to defend our homeland's border. These youth fought bravely, just as their fathers and older brothers had before them. We, and perhaps the entire world, were stunned, asking, why would one socialist country invade another socialist country? Indeed, here was true sorrow. Nevertheless, I understood that each nation, even among socialist nations, held its own interest paramount. I remembered an anecdote from 8 years before, around 1971, during a meeting in Kiruna, northern Sweden. It was near midnight, and snow was falling heavily. Even though the area was thinly populated, people arrived in large numbers, including the elderly. After I described the situation in Vietnam, an elderly woman stood up and asked, "Have you Vietnamese friends thought about what you will do after you've chased out the Americans and then the Chinese arrive?" We in our delegation looked at each other. How could she ask such a question? I explained that no such incident could transpire between socialist countries, for we socialists shared the comradely feeling of brothers and sisters. Yet now, in 1979, hearing that China had invaded Vietnam, I wondered, what would that elderly woman think? She had been truly profound, with an experienced person's range of sight. As for us, we had been so naive. The border war with China was incredibly cruel, with more than 120,000 Chinese troops assaulting the 6 northern provinces of Vietnam, bringing so many casualties and so much material loss. Several tens of thousands of our children and younger siblings once again poured out their blood to protect our country. For so many years, we have not wanted to tell the stories of that pain and the relationship between Vietnam and China. But it is disturbing that even today, in Chinese public discussion, there are cruel distortions. Where our interlocutors say that the events of February 17th, 1979 occurred because Vietnam provoked China, that Vietnam was ungrateful and had no sense of gratitude. How could Vietnam, having just passed through 30 years of cruel war and still having to address so many unbound war wounds, attack another country? Why would Vietnam provoke China, a huge socialist country, which had helped us liberate and reunite our nation? How could protecting our own people from Khmer Rouge genocide and saving the Cambodian people from genocide be considered a crime? A subsequent situation helps us see the truth. On March 14th, 1988, China sent its naval forces to occupy Gac Ma, Johnson South Reef, which belongs to Vietnam's Truong Sa archipelago, the Spratlys. 64 Vietnamese troops died in combat. Then, in 2009, China announced its cow's tongue, with 9 points in an assault aimed at occupying all the East Sea, regardless of international law. Using that absurd premise, China has been constantly engaged in actions invading the territory of other nations, in particular territory belonging to Vietnam. This threatens the region's peace and security. Indeed, China has exposed its expansionist intentions recently, as it did in 1979. Life during 1979 and early 1980 was especially hard. In general, party and state officials had to do additional work, such as making handicrafts and tending chickens or pigs to supplement their meager wages. People would say, teaching is the additional work of teachers. Tens of thousands of teachers asked to quit. The state had to lay off some of its staff. The Ministry of Education lost many of its best teachers. In April 1980, I discussed with comrades from the Vietnam Educators Union the idea for a national congress in Nguyen Dung District, Ha Bac Province, to discuss ways to improve teachers' lives. Nguyen Dung had developed some good models. We wanted to mobilize a movement, study, and practice like Nguyen Dung. Educational leaders in Nguyen Dung had asked the local authorities for land to plant Hai-Jim lychees. They calculated that 10 lychee trees planted at an educational office could improve the teachers' livelihoods. Other local educational offices followed this movement. Hai-Jim lychees spread across many northern provinces. After 2 years, many districts and communes had growing symbols of their concern for teachers' welfare. Many other sites organized special funds to assist teachers. These sacrifices and this dedication impressed me. I was particularly touched by the teachers who left their homes in the cities and the deltas to work in our mountainous provinces, such as Chao Bang, Lai Chau, and Lang Son. Working conditions were strenuous. The teachers had to motivate families in order to have students. Each class had only a few students, often at different grade levels. Teachers' living conditions in the mountains were primitive, and they were isolated from the country's general development. Their greatest hardship was to spend decades in the mountains without the chance to return home to the Delta. One woman spoke to me in confidence, saying, "For sure, I've lost my chance to find a husband." I think we do not yet know all the silent sacrifices of those brothers and sisters. My comrades and I in the ministry leadership understood clearly the crucial role of teachers. Our troops had been decisive on the battlefield. Now, our teachers were warriors on a new front. Their task was rebuilding the nation to bring about a highly educated, skilled, and spirited populace. We examined our system and policies regarding teachers and saw that our ministry's management was weaker than staff in other governmental branches. We researched quality and professional status to implement a policy of salaries and allowances, persuading the government, the other ministries, and branches was difficult because the educational system included so many people. Education was the country's largest branch after the Army in terms of personnel. These days, the situation is different. Finally, at the end of 1983, the state decided to readjust educational salaries and address other systemic policy issues, with the most important question being seniority. Many working in the educational system still mention this as the turning point in educational reform, to honor teachers and encourage their spirit. The ministry and the Vietnam Educators Union proposed that the Council of Ministers choose November 20th each year for Vietnam Teachers' Day. We also suggested the state create titles, People's Teacher and Merit Teacher, for those who had taught for many years and had made significant contributions to the educational system. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. When I arrived at the Ministry of Education, the Politburo was finishing Decision 14 about education. Prime Minister Pham Van Dong had educational expertise and a commitment to the profession, as did Comrade de Hugh. The Politburo announced its decision on January 11th, 1979. We in the ministry's leadership spent considerable time studying Decision 14, which contained basic guidelines for building a progressive, socialist educational system. Even now, to my thinking, that decision's major points still have value. To implement Decision 14, we had to examine the actual situations on site and then establish appropriate objectives, content, and methodologies. To date, we still have not yet properly achieved that major point, for some areas of our educational system remain heavily dogmatic and willful. Education is a difficult and complicated field because its realm encompasses an individual's development from early years to maturity. For this reason, to establish correct guidelines, in particular curricula and methodologies, we relied on the Institute of Educational Science and assigned to it additional, highly trained professionals. Golmat Vo Tuan No was responsible for the institute along with Pham Minh Hac and Pham Tut Dong, Vedupat Dr. Vet in Psicholo en Ha Tenu, and Pham Van Hoen, who also had doctorates. Later, in 1985, some comrades criticized this work of educational reform and declared it a failure. I think that evaluation was unfair, inaccurate, and partisan. Comparing the earlier curriculum and textbooks with the reformed ones makes clear the later material's progressive qualities. On the other hand, Decision 14 salient point was that the system needed to find ways to internalize its guiding principles, study in combination with practice, comprehensive education in intellectual areas, morality, physical abilities, and aesthetics, and vocational training for workers and professionals. We still have not properly implemented these important principles of Decision 14. In 1981, I was introduced and elected to the party's Central Committee. This acknowledged my contribution to the nation's work in general and simultaneously added to my responsibilities. In 1982, Deputy Minister Bui Tan Kiat passed away, and Comrade Nguyen Neek Dam left to become president of the DAC LAC People's Committee. The ministry was assigned two new, young deputy ministers, Comrades Luong Nak Ton and Tran Xuan Ni. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In the summer of 1983, representatives from across the educational system met at Sam Son, Tan Hoa Province. We agreed on the Sam Son announcement, which introduced educational points into actual school activities, particularly into vocational training. After that meeting, An ebullient atmosphere spread across the educational system. Every region established a technical center for general vocational training, built factory schools, and planted experimental agricultural fields as well as gardens for traditional medicine. All teachers and students both studied and did manual labor. The state undertook a major initiative of tree planting called Green Cover for bare hills. In 1984, the Ministry of Education worked with the Ministry of Forestry to plant 14 million trees, one tree for each student, achieving our goal within a year. I went on a tour of schools in Quang Tri Province, where the war's destruction had been momentous. I was delighted to find Con Tien and Tan Lam schools surrounded by forests of young trees, which the students and teachers had planted. In addition to production, we instituted a savings movement, contribute bits of paper, collect bottles and cans, and gather duck feathers. The country's economic situation was dire. This program educated our students in community spirit and assisted the school's economic viability. Administrators and parents were supportive. Yet with such a widespread movement, how could we avoid shortcomings? Unfortunately, instead of seeing the movement's larger meaning, some people intervened and stopped the students' activities because these initiatives were beyond the very strict socio-political economic limits enforced by the economic police at a time when we had an extremely rigorous model of socialism. In 1985, we finished preparations for instituting basic educational reform, although some tasks remained, in particular pedagogical training. This step required early intervention. Since we needed to move fast, we decided to take a step-by-step approach in switching textbooks for the primary level and the beginning of the secondary level. Implementation of educational reform began in 1985 and was to last until 1991 for the first full cycle. We planned to complete and consolidate the work in a second cycle. Of course, the situation in Vietnam changed markedly at the end of 1986 with renovation and the shift to a socialist market economy. Education faced new tests and new demands. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. During my 10 years as minister, I paid constant attention to education in industrial areas. I felt we must train the workers' children in order to maintain a strong class of industrial laborers. I visited the Han Gai and Cam Pha mines, as well as the Nguyen steel factory to guide and encourage expansion of the ministry's education guidelines. I was also attentive to ethnic minority areas. During my tenure, the ministry established directives for a system of on-site boarding schools for ethnic minorities in provinces, districts, and communes. These schools saved ethnic minority students from walking dozens of kilometers to school each day. I also concentrated on the role of women within the ministry. More than 80% of the teachers in the general school system were women. Shouldn't we also have a large number of women administrators? Thus, the Ministry of Education announced a directive. Every level of administration, from local schools to school systems to universities, must have women in the leadership. Through this decision, women administrators became eligible for appointments and had access to further self-development. The educational emulation movement was one of the most effective and enduring emulation movements for enhancing patriotism. In 1964, President Ho had instituted the emulation model, teach well, study well. Later, in his last letter to the educational system, Ho Chi Minh counseled, even when facing difficulties everywhere, you must continue the emulation campaign to teach well and study well. President Ho had a deep understanding of education's social function. He would mention the ancient saying, for a legacy in a decade, plant trees. For a legacy in a century, nourish the people. Iolten Visai Bakli, a poor area of the Midlands with a model school in the nation's emulation movement. Baklaya School had 2 levels, elementary and general, in a simple building. The students were gaunt, yet their attention to their studies and the seriousness of the school's activities touched me. Many teachers from this school received additional training and became staff in the Ministry of Education and the Institute for Scientific Education, while its students became staff and workers in their ancestral villages. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. During our work to expand education, we relied on experience from other socialist countries, in particular the Soviet Union and the Democratic Republic of Germany, East Germany, where we sent many staff for training in scientific areas, including pedagogy and psychology. I had a special collegial relationship with Madame Margot Honecker, the Minister of Education for the Democratic Republic of Germany. She was a skilled, committed educator. We Vietnamese drew from the German experience in vocational training for our workers' educational program. For curricula and textbooks, we relied primarily on Soviet experience and, in part, on that of France. Cuba was a new socialist country. Our Cuban friends had a progressive outlook. They had decided that the party and state's first task was to emphasize education. Visitors to Cuba often went to Youth Island, where students both studied and worked. There, thousands of Cuban youth continued their studies and planted fruit for export. This was indeed impressive. Well-nourished pupils learned on site in a wholesome school. Here was a pleasing point. Our Cuban friends said they had picked up their educational model, study and work from Vietnam. They brought the model home and spread it with good results. We had established that model in 1974 and 1975, when the need for older rural youth to study and work was enormous. Older rural students lived too far from the tertiary schools in the provincial or district towns to continue their studies. Students at the model tertiary Hoa Binh Province Socialist Labor School both studied and learned a trade, thereby achieving the technical skills they needed to make a living. This school concentrated on production of cassava, the local agricultural crop appropriate to land in that area. Older students lived at the site and returned home for the summer. These schools delighted me. I visited them often to observe the students' study practice and living conditions. Many localities use this model, including Phu Siu School in Nguyen Province, as well as Tam Lam and Con Tien schools in Quang Tri Province. Students from these schools became good workers. However, building and managing these study and work boarding schools required huge efforts by local authorities and the provincial educational system. I regret that we have abandoned this excellent educational focus in what I worry will become a budget move that saved money but compromised quality and distanced us from the goal of equality in education. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In 1984, we were preparing to expand our educational reforms, but the ministry's budget had no line item for this activity. When I reported the budget shortage to Premier Pham Van Dong, he shook his head in sympathy. If you can do it without money, he said, you are truly smart. At this time, living conditions for the ministry's office staff were difficult. Many officials did additional paid work outside their official responsibilities. Deputy Minister Tran Xuan Ni noticed that these secondary jobs dissipated our staff members' energy so that they were not concentrating on the ministry's work. He and others in the ministry discussed with me the idea of establishing the Educational Services Company as a focal point for the school's production output, according to the directive. Take productive labor into the schools. These staff members collected funds from other staff to provide part of the company's initial capital. Tran Xuan Ni established a program with 10 points describing appropriate activities for schools having the means and ability. The ministry would provide guidance and assistance through the Educational Services Company. The company built a kiln to produce pottery. Early efforts were successful. Many comrades in the educational system and other branches praised the products: pottery, educational materials, kindergarten toys, etc. The atmosphere in participating schools was effervescent. Nowadays, people reading these sentences will say, "Why mention activities, which are so petty?" However, we must remember the circumstances at that time. Our national economic policy was extremely strict and rigorous. We were desperately poor. People had nothing. Anyone making even the smallest profit from a creative enterprise suffered from police watchers and became the topic of malicious gossip. Any ministries wanting to take initiatives also met with difficulties and blockage. The economic police noticed that the Ministry of Education was extremely active in finishing one project and starting another. Police officers would visit to ask about our health. Staff working in the Educational Services Company, and I lost a great deal of time greeting these visitors and reporting on those student projects. The police visitors' thinking was outdated. During inspections, these officers would remain silent if they saw someone making a profit, but as soon as they heard of money lost in a trade, they looked for serious shortcomings. Everyone knows that one always wants to make a profit in business, but equally, it is unrealistic to think one will profit immediately. The economic police demanded that I dismiss this person and then that person so these staff members could have their situation solved. I refused because I knew these brothers and sisters had done nothing wrong. They had only followed the ministry's directives. Thus, the ministry was responsible for protecting them. My resolute attitude on this matter brought me countless problems. Even now, as I think about it, I still believe my attitude was correct. If I have any regret, it is that I could not completely protect all the people under me. I thank comrades Tran Xuan Ni, Don Van D, and many other brothers and sisters who supported me when countless obstacles were scattered in my path. My greatest regret is that the movement to introduce work and vocational training into schools, which had only just burst forth, suffered from such dousings of icy water. The negative results remain today. Many comrades say, "Perhaps your views were ahead of the times," like Uncle Kim Knox with his agricultural piecework. They made him miserable because he saw a solution earlier than everyone else. But now, everyone accepts his view and says he was correct. Anything new often suffers from critics looking for ways to obstruct the initiative. Yet only if we have people willing to look ahead can we have change, economic development, and progress. That's the law of life and of economic and intellectual development. I finished 2 terms as Minister of Education with greater understanding of our country's social situation, added experience in state management, and wonderful memories of time with the staff and teachers in our educational system. I am proud to have given my greatest effort to complete my assignment. Many problems remained, and I left tasks unfinished. We still had no directives in place to solve basic problems. Yet renovation placed extensive demands on the education our people needed for the nation's development. My greatest personal gain was a deepening understanding about the importance of education for the nation and for each individual. Essential to establishing equal rights for every person is the right to study and secure the opportunity to grow and work toward a future life. I also understood more deeply a teaching we can perhaps attribute to Elder Phan Chau Trin. Expand the people's intellectual standard, adjust their intellectual standard, and support improved living standards. That theory still has value today, when the need is even clearer and more pressing. If we do not develop our nation's intellectual standard to its greatest strength, if we do not have adequate intellectual standards for our schools, then we cannot develop our country. Our people will not be able to stay abreast of other peoples from across the world. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In 1984, my husband Kang began his retirement. He had high blood pressure and was not as healthy as before. For years, he had been an Army officer wrapped up in his work. When he retired, he became active in our neighborhood and served as General Secretary of a model party cell. He was much beloved by his comrades. Kang would make careful preparations for party cell meetings, which were held at our house. I would tease him, saying, "You plan more carefully for the local party cell than I do for a meeting of the party central committee." He'd laugh and say, "Living with a purpose brings me joy." To support my work, he shouldered all the family tasks except the cooking. I was very fortunate to have a life partner who was constantly empathetic and loving. At the end of 1984, we had especially good news. Our daughter Mai married, and a month later, our son Tang also married. The other two families were both from the Hanoi intelligentsia. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Late 1986 brought an important turning point in our country's post-war development. During the years after the war, we had a major socioeconomic crisis. Dogmatic thinking and the extended rationing system brought endless difficulties. People's ordinary lives were hard for many reasons. Food and other necessities were in extremely short supply. The directives forbidding small markets were supposed to limit speculation and protect the state's management system with equal allotments. However, in reality, those directives hampered the circulation of goods and led to serious limitations in production. Life became increasingly stressful, while the authorities became even stricter in forbidding markets. Some officials left the city for their ancestral villages, where relatives gave them a little rice. Other officials went on assignment and returned with a kilo of tea. The economic police invited such people in for questioning and confiscated their rice and tea. My close friends and the mid and high-level staff at the Ministry of Education received moldy rice mixed with cassava and cereal for our rations. Each month, an entire family received only 1 kilo of meat mixed with fat. Given the dreadful living situation, it is no wonder that people sought a way out. Many cooperatives in the countryside implemented piecework so that farmers could do some work only for themselves instead of for the collective. Leaders in many local areas could no longer stand with their arms folded. Officials in Long and province implemented put a price on salary. In reality, they erased the backward and useless rationing system. It was impossible to silence the word of mouth among the populace about these activities. Indeed, these initiatives encouraged serious work and preparation for the 20th Communist Party Congress in late 1986. Comrades in the party leadership divided up the local sites to visit. Party General Secretary Trong Chin went to Ho Chi Minh City to see what was happening at factories. Then he went along in the area that had dared to break the economic rules and was actually developing economically. The party heard what the people said about their need for viable livelihoods. The party leadership sent the first draft of its report for the party congress to the lower levels. Lively and sometimes contentious discussions ensued until the final draft, which became a true report looking straight at the truth. From that base came renovation, the major political and economic shift in late 1986 that broke the prolonged jam and created Vietnam's new, vital season of invigorated economic development. Here was an achievement of all our people, the entire party, and a deep lesson. We must listen to the people. If we stray from the people, we will face difficulties. If we stay close to the people, then we can build strength. In 1986, Comrade Nguyen Van Lin, the person regarded as the decisive leader for renovation, was elected party general secretary. How could Nguyen Van Lin have seen this situation so early and so clearly? My guess is this. An important part of Nguyen Van Lin's political work for many years during both the French War and the American War was as an underground revolutionary in Saigon, Cholon, a very dynamic city. During those years, he would have had direct exposure to the city's vigorous market economy with its many classes of people. He understood the people's wishes and strengths. I think the lessons of the Vieth Party Congress will always remain timely for our country's development. People in the international community know about the party's renovation policy. Indeed, renovation has become a word used worldwide in reference to Vietnam. Renovation is rather like the phrase Dien Bien Phuet, which meant a telling blow and was in vogue after the Vietnamese victory over the French at Dien Bien Phu. In the middle of 1987, I moved to the party's Central-Level Foreign Relations Department. Once again, I returned to people diplomacy. Returning to people diplomacy. In 1987, I returned to my forte of 20 years before. When I first became active in foreign relations in the 1950s, I worked in people-to-people diplomacy, representing the Youth Union, the Women's Union, and the Asian African Solidarity Committee in an effort to encourage people from other countries to support our opposition to U.S. intervention in the South. Later, I was appointed Foreign Minister of the Provisional Revolutionary Government, PRG, of the Republic of South Vietnam and shifted to state diplomacy. Now, in 1987, I was returning to people diplomacy as Deputy Director of the Party Foreign Relations Department and President of the Union of Organizations for Peace, Solidarity, and Friendship with All Nations, the Union. Simultaneously, in terms of the state, I served as chair of the National Assembly's Foreign Relations Committee. From personal experience, I expected shifting from state diplomacy to people diplomacy would not bring new hurdles, but would instead allow greater flexibility and more opportunities for initiative. In our country, the people as a whole and the state administration have the same objective. In earlier years, our shared goal had been to oppose the imperialists in order to secure independence and unification. Now, as I took on this new position, our goal was to protect and rebuild our nation. The major difference was the focus of my activities, since people-to-people diplomacy involved mobilizing people in other nations for our cause, while state diplomacy focused on building relationships between governments. In our system, these two lines of diplomatic work support each other and create the special character of Vietnamese diplomacy in modern times. In general, most people wish for peace and freedom and would, if asked, take a stand on the side of justice. In contrast, the administrations of capitalist, imperialist countries support the profiting class and the rights of special interest cliques. These governments often work in opposition to the people's wishes. They play the role of divide and conquer, often leading people away from their own true interest and away from the true interest of others from different religious or racial groups. We know that working with ordinary people is very important because the people do have the power to force their governments to change policy. We know the French people's movement against the French war in Vietnam, and then a similar American people's movement helped force the French and U.S. administrations to end their wars of aggression. I never studied in a school of international relations, but instead moved from working as an organizer of local political activities in Saigon to mobilizing among the people. Activism in people-to-people diplomacy was appropriate for me, since the work still involved mobilizing, but the scope was worldwide. People-to-people diplomacy requires good arguments and the empathy needed to persuade others. Yet you must remain rigorous in your position. Most important is honesty with colleagues. I never spoke only about our people's good qualities and achievements. I would also note the deficiencies that were readily apparent. For that reason, when something was not clear to our foreign friends, they would seek me out. They would say, "I trust Madam Binh. I must ask her." Women are easily moved by the pain and injustice others endure. However, youth, workers, intellectuals, and artists, each one of them has his or her social context. To be effective, our struggle for freedom, independence, and the right to live had to affect each person emotionally. The worldwide people's solidarity movement supporting Vietnam's just cause, particularly during the American War of Aggression, was the largest international movement ever seen at that time. It strongly affected the American administration's policies. Important to that movement were contributions from our people-to-people diplomacy army, which worked continuously for several decades. We can say that, during those war years, our Vietnamese warriors on the diplomatic front left their footprints everywhere, from the coldest areas near the North Pole to the smallest islands in the Pacific Ocean. We were present whenever we had an invitation and the wherewithal to travel. This was possible because of huge assistance from friendly countries, the international democratic organizations, and the organizations for Asian Pacific solidarity. They supported us in spirit and with funding so that Vietnamese delegations could take our message to other nations. A key guideline for many international democratic organizations may seem surprising. Those directly active in the struggle receive priority for assistance. As a result, during the war, our delegation from the South and the North did not spend Vietnamese funds for their worldwide activism. Since I was returning to a familiar environment, I felt no reservations. Although the situation in our country had changed completely, my comrades and I in the Union of Organizations for Peace, solidarity and friendship with all nations concentrated on opening bilateral friendship associations. Our country had achieved independence and reunification, and we had unified our administrative structure. Now, although we were attentive to state diplomacy, we concentrated on organizing internationally with our supporters. We sent delegations to visit other countries, received organizations working in solidarity with Vietnam, and attended meetings supporting the other nations that continued to struggle. In 1982, the Asian Pacific Solidarity Committee elected me as vice president, a position I continue to hold. Hence, 2 or 3 times a year, I would take part in meetings which opposed apartheid in South Africa, supported Palestine, and opposed the plots to invade Cuba. Our friends in those settings appreciated hearing our voice. For Vietnam had become a symbol and a model for other countries. For many years, the Soviet Union, the German Democratic Republic, and Eastern European socialist countries contributed both political and financial support to the international democratic organizations attending these meetings. When the Soviet bloc split apart, the international democratic organizations, including the Committee for Asian African Solidarity, faced many difficulties. People-to-people diplomacy in the Soviet Union and Eastern European nations was active and inspiring between 1970 and 1980, offering financial and psychological support for international solidarity. We had portraits of socialism, perhaps idealized, with its many beautiful details from the Soviet Union and other socialist countries. These inspired revolutionary movements in general, as well as socialist solidarity movements opposing imperialism and capitalism. Looking back at that period, I wonder whether some of those socialist countries may have made mistakes, which led to their weakening or even disintegration. Still, We should not deny the achievements of those socialist societies, which emphasize care for children and the elderly, and where no great distance existed between laborers, officials, and intellectuals. In 1985, many party members in other countries were delighted as perestroika began to restructure the Soviet Union. They wanted the Soviet Union to address its shortcomings, develop a long-term base, make secure changes, and become even stronger. At about that same time, in 1986, we in Vietnam accepted the huge shift to renovation, which we continue to follow today. We looked straight at the truth. We were determined to dismantle the conservatism that had stymied us. Our renovation and the Soviet Union's perestroika occurred at about the same time, but the situation in the two countries was entirely different. The causes of the crises were different, the solutions were different, and the results were different. I do not want to go deeply into the internal affairs of a friendly country. The leaders of each country are responsible for answering to their own people. I hope only that the former Soviet Union and the former socialist countries will remain strong, loyal, and trusted friends, and will develop in ways honoring their people's interests and their heroic heritage. We Vietnamese are delighted and proud of our achievements during renovation. But we have also only just overcome a serious socioeconomic crisis. When renovation began, we faced many challenges to our independence and sovereignty. Now, we are on the way to regaining prosperity for our nation and happiness for our people. While on that route, we needed our friends' support and the spirit of international solidarity. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. During my tenure as chair of the National Assembly's Foreign Relations Committee, several other comrades and I took part in conferences of the Interparliamentary Union, IPU. At that time, the hot issues in people's minds about Vietnam were Cambodia and our detaining and re-educating officers from the former Saigon administration. Many people in several countries admired Vietnam for generously helping Cambodians escape the Pol Pot regime's genocide. These people understood that we had carried out a noble international duty while simultaneously protecting our own independence and sovereignty, which we had just achieved after years of sacrifice and hardship. The Cambodian people faced genocide, such as humanity may have rarely seen. Vietnam was the only country willing to sacrifice to save its friend. No one else lent a hand. We were wholehearted in helping our Cambodian friends, and we were also determined to fight off what we saw as another new plot. Hence, we were determined also to protect our country from Khmer Rouge incursions into southwestern Vietnam, when we had only just achieved control over our own borders. However, some nations misunderstood our magnanimity and the meaning of our sacrificial struggle. The United States seized this opportunity to heighten its embargo against Vietnam. We had to explain our principles so our friends understood. Afterwards, people and even governments of Western countries recognized our purpose, saying, "We did not completely understand Vietnam. If you friends had not stopped the genocide in Cambodia, no one knows what would have happened to the Cambodian people. For years, we had to clench our teeth and pay a high price in the international community for having helped our friends in Cambodia." I remember one ECOSOC conference in Bangkok, where representatives from Singapore, Thailand, and other nations accused Vietnam of invasion, imperialism, and colonialism. Usually, I would refute their accusations and repeat that the Vietnamese people's war had lasted 30 years. I would explain our reasons for helping the Cambodian people. This time, some people understood. They said, "It's so good to be imperialists and colonialists like Vietnam." Those of a realistic bent could understand why we had detained officers from the Saigon administration for re-education. They knew that in 1975, we did not wipe out the Saigon army, but instead only dispersed it. Those forces could have recovered. If we had not detained the Saigon officers, we would have left behind a dangerous military infrastructure for any new administration. Later, we gradually released the officers. In some cases, we held officers for a needlessly long time, and some treatment situations were improper, leading to negative outcomes. At first, some delegations at the Interparliamentary Union, IPU, denounced Vietnam, even though they accepted that our new administration had not perpetrated a sea of blood or revenge against the defeated. However, after many meetings with us as witnesses, this issue receded. At that time, progressive people found it disconcerting that some representatives from former socialist countries in Eastern Europe spoke out with unsparing accusations against the old socialist system. Among them were doctors and lawyers who had benefited from the socialist educational system. Nevertheless, they denounced the socialist system's support for education and training. I remember one IPU meeting in Bulgaria. I was very moved when a demure Japanese woman spoke. She stated her name, identified herself as a communist, and spoke about the situation in Japan. She spoke calmly about the mistakes that had occurred in the former socialist countries of Eastern Europe. Then she said one must analyze the historical source of that phenomenon to evaluate it correctly with understanding and fairness. Her open, self-confident attitude, after several reckless, revengeful speeches, encouraged those at the meeting to regain their balance. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. At that time, an important duty of the National Assembly's Foreign Relations Committee was to encourage other countries and U.S. organizations sympathetic to Vietnam to demand that the U.S. government lift its embargo. Many National Assembly delegations and people's organizations went to the United States to lobby. Here, I should also mention Americans working to normalize relations between the United States and Vietnam. In particular, the Aspen Institute and John McAuliffe, director of the U.S. Indochina Reconciliation Project. At the same time, the Union shifted its political activities to include economic and cultural cooperation appropriate to renovation. We suggested to the government that we establish the People's Aid Coordinating Committee, PACOM, to facilitate assistance from international non-governmental organizations. Ingos, as far as I know, from that time during the embargo until now, INGO activities have given substantial assistance so that impoverished Vietnamese can improve their livelihoods. As I have noted, after 1975, we entered a severe socioeconomic crisis when our country was at its lowest post-war ebb and as some of the other socialist countries were disintegrating. Many well-intentioned international friends were worried. They were unable to see how Vietnam could develop. I had two close friends, Gabriel and Joyce Kalko. He was a professor of economics, while she was a historian. They were leftist Americans who had published a famous book, Anatomy of a War. Many Vietnamese said of that book, their evaluation of the situation and their analysis of the American and Vietnamese principles are similar to ours. In about 1982, the Kalkos returned to visit Vietnam. After that, we invited them many times, but they were too busy. Now, the sad news is that both Kalkos have passed on. While the Kalkos were active, they sent letters to some friends in Vietnam, worrying that Vietnam would abandon socialism and become like the Soviet Union and China. They feared the capitalist class would develop and counter the people's interests. Their assessment resembles that of some other good friends. However, given the complicated new situation, these friends surely cannot understand all the realities in our country. Meanwhile, other friends who supported us during the war were despondent because Vietnam followed socialism instead of nationalist independence like many nations in the region. It's fair to say that after the war, there were some shifting relationships and even splits between us and some international friends. Some wanted us to turn to the right, while others wanted us to bend to the left. This is easy to understand. Other friends remained calm and objective. They thought Vietnam's choice was the Vietnamese people's decision. Those friends only wanted us to have a better life worthy of the sacrifices and hardships borne during many years of war. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In 1989, 2 years after beginning work with the union, I suffered a major loss. My husband Kang passed away from illness. At the time, our son Tang was studying in Czechoslovakia. It all happened suddenly. On December 24th, a Sunday, Kang and I were talking about our 2 grandchildren. That evening, we took Kang in an emergency run to 108 hospital, which had treated him before. I wanted to stay over at the hospital to look after him, but he insisted I go home to rest. His character was like that. He would never trouble anyone, not even his wife or children. The next morning, I arrived to visit him before going to a National Assembly session. He was very weak and could only say, "I'm so tired." The doctor arrived to give him an injection for his heart. With that, King stopped breathing. And so, our plans, simple hopes, deep attachment, and our thought that after I retired, we would take better care of each other and travel as tourists to different sites. All that disappeared in a flash. I had many friends and comrades around me. They were endlessly sympathetic, but I still felt truly alone and bereft. That pain is endless. Until now, I do not have anyone with whom I can pour out every thought, confidence, and worry, and from whom I can receive encouragement and words of comfort that I need. Life is like that. What can we do? The Vice Presidency. After Kang's death, my friends in Ho Chi Minh City urged me to return to the home I'd left. I had close friends in Ho Chi Minh City from my activist days opposing the French. In addition, I had other close friends from the former South who had regrouped to the North following the Geneva Agreements. They had returned home after liberation in 1975 and urged me also to return. 2 of my brothers, Nguyen Dong Ha and Nguyen Dong Ho, were also in Ho Chi Minh City. Ha, the next youngest of my siblings, had been an activist in the South during the American period. The Saigon authorities imprisoned him on Con Dao Island, where they held him in a tiger cage for nearly 7 years. I'd been separated from our family for the entire 21 years that Vietnam was divided into South and North. He was very keen on reuniting our family, and particularly wanted to be close to. Second older, eldest sister. We two had so many shared memories. From our childhood, I was 3 years younger. At age 16, he joined the Saigon Revolutionary Youth Union, where he was an organizer until his arrest in late 1968. Ho, who had earned his Master's degree in mechanical engineering, returned after liberation from his studies in Russia to work in Ho Chi Minh City. In 1990, my son Tang went to Ho Chi Minh City to work and also to prepare for my return. I have been based in Hanoi for 36 years, ever since regrouping to the north in 1954. That was a longer time than my youth and years of activism in the South. I come to understand quite a bit about northern Vietnam and had many close friends here from my years working at the Central Level Women's Union, the Reunification Committee, the Foreign Ministry, the Party Central Level External Relations Committee, and the National Assembly. But in truth, the memories of my youth and those years when my parents and siblings were all together in the South had created my most deeply felt memories, which I could not forget. This was my thinking in the beginning of 1992 when Party General Secretary Du Muoi came to see me. He told me the comrades in the Politburo had decided to nominate me at the next National Assembly session to serve as the country's vice president. This news caught me totally by surprise. My first reaction was to refuse because I was already 65, well beyond the established and required retirement age of 55 for women. Besides, I already had plans to live in Ho Chi Minh City. I thanked Comrade Dumoy, saying, "It's regrettable that when I was still young and could have perhaps made a substantial contribution, you comrades didn't evaluate me accurately. But now, I've reached the age when I must retire." To tell the truth, this was hardly a deliberated response, but instead an honest exposure of the feelings I had held for a long time. But then I thought again. I had always worked for our nation and for no other purpose. In the end, I agreed to accept this new duty and continue working. My children had no opinions about my decision. "Mother," they said, "it's up to you." Ma and Tang had never relied on their parents' positions. This was true when I served as Minister of Education and true when I was Vice President. But I was not happy. He spoke half in jest, half in truth. "I want you to lose this election for the National Assembly," he said. "That way, you'll avoid selection for Vice President. Then you can return and live with us." But I did not follow Ha's wish. A few years later, Ha passed on while I was still working in Hanoi, and so I continued working for 10 more years. For 2 terms as the country's Vice President. Asterisk. I was 65 when I accepted the vice presidency. I believe that I carried out the responsibilities given me both clearly and well. Because of this, I've given some thought to our country's policy regarding women officials. Because the operative assumption is that women over the age of 55 or 60 absolutely cannot produce good work. During my tenure, I was fortunate to receive many important assignments. Yet countless other older and younger women from before me and after me had excellent qualifications. They were not inferior to the men, but unfortunately their abilities were not recognized. They earned, but have not received their just place in society. I believe that, in order to develop any nation, we must create conditions whereby women can both tend their families and contribute to the nation's management. This need is particularly true for a country like Vietnam, which has endured so many struggles to create a cultured, contented life for its people. Establishing a family and tending our children are extremely important responsibilities. Women cannot neglect that work. But the care of children is also society's responsibility. We need a policy to assist women with the practicalities of rearing children. Simultaneously, the state should increase participation of women in the nation's management. It is utterly indispensable that we have guidelines and policies to spread this change across all areas of society. Until now, our policies regarding officials have not affirmed the abilities of women. Thus, we have not yet created the conditions needed for women to advance. Yet now, today, we are in the 21st century. Many activists across the world are saying this is the century of women. I hope Vietnamese women will make great advancements. I hope Vietnamese society will give women a place worthy of their great achievements and potential. Asterisk. Well, I began to serve as vice president. President Le Duc assigned me to assist him with tasks in diplomacy, education, health, patriotic emulation campaigns, and, later, with judicial affairs. In general, these tasks were not unusual for me. I often represented the president in receiving diplomatic credentials. I don't remember how many newly arrived ambassadors to Vietnam I met when they came to present their credentials. Our role in the international arena had improved substantially by the beginning of 1996. We had withdrawn all our troops from Cambodia the United States had lifted its embargo, and we had normalized our diplomatic relations with the major powers. Many countries had already established normalized relations with Vietnam, but did not yet have embassies in Hanoi. Now, they asked to open embassies. Other countries had only recently established diplomatic relations with us. Our foreign policy was to diversify our foreign relations and increase our multilateral relationships. We wanted to be friends with all nations in support of peace, freedom, and social progress in order to implement our important mission, building and developing our country. After the presentation of credentials, I had a chance to talk with the ambassadors. Since I had been active in diplomatic relations for a relatively long time, I knew a little about the situation in many countries and the relationship between those countries and Vietnam. As a result, my conversations with ambassadors were both delightful and useful to both sides. In addition to my diplomatic activities, I also met with heads of state, government officials from other countries, and many foreign peoples' delegations of intellectuals, youth, and women. These meetings included the friends who had supported us during our resistance wars against France and the United States. The comrade in charge of the office of the president counseled me. "Older sister," he said, "now that you are a representative of the state, you should not meet with delegations unless they are from states or governments." I did not agree. Why should it be that way? Our diplomacy was revolutionary diplomacy. Our national tradition is to be true to our friends. I took this point up in a discussion with President Le Duc, who completely agreed with me. Beginning in 1991, the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie organized meetings of its leaders every 2 years. I was assigned to attend these meetings. I went to one conference on Mauritius Island, 1993, with the theme Unity in Diversity, to another in Benin, 1995, with the theme Dialogue, Cooperation, and Development, and to the one in Canada, 1999, with the theme Youth. Since I knew French, this assignment was not difficult. Most of the organization's members were former French colonies, which were especially sympathetic with Vietnam, while the two large countries, France and Canada, also gave Vietnam special consideration. Even though conference representatives arrived with different objectives, the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie gathered together more than 50 countries and territories into a forceful concentration of nations. Everyone spoke French and knew about and understood French culture. The delegation from Vietnam used these meetings to concentrate on cooperative relationships with France and Canada in economics, culture, and education. On another front, we wanted to increase solidarity and cooperation with the African members that shared the goal of protecting national independence and developing our own countries. I first met French President Jacques Chirac in the Benin Republic. The Vietnamese and the French had developed a special friendship after our shared history. Uncle Ho, other Vietnamese leaders, and I all had many close friends in France. President Chirac received me with great warmth. On that occasion, I raised this question: why had France placed Vietnam on its fourth priority level for commerce? "There's no reason," President Chirac said. He immediately called over his special assistant and said, "Shift Vietnam to the third level." With that, he addressed our request. After that conversation, I had many chances to meet President Chirac, who was always solicitous. We in the diplomatic corps knew Mr. Chirac was a member of the Union pour un Mouvement Populaire, a centre-rightist party. However, his diplomatic principles were strong and progressive. He was determined not to join the United States in its war of invasion against Iraq. President Chirac had a sympathetic attitude toward Vietnam. Some people said President Chirac's response to Vietnam was better than that of another country's president, whose party was regarded as leftist. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In 1994, I visited West Africa, particularly the Francophone countries that I had visited during our resistance war against the United States. At the request of our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I went to Algeria, Mali, Guinea-Bissau, and Senegal to improve on our traditional solidarity. These countries had developed considerably compared with 20 years before, but not as much as Asian countries. In general, they still faced major difficulties, in particular food shortages. Perhaps one can say they faced the additional challenges that had appeared with globalization. These friends admired Vietnam for our victory over major imperialist nations and our achievements in development. Our delegation included Minister of Health Nguyen, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs Nguyen, and Comrade Binh, Deputy General Director of the Food Company of the North. Our visits were favorable since I had personally made the acquaintance of these countries' presidents and prime ministers when they were foreign ministers. We were received with high honors wherever we went. The presidents of Algeria, Guinea, and Mali had their own airplanes and provided us with travel to our next destination. After this trip, while en route from Senegal to Paris, I had a delightful experience. I sat next to Mr. Jacques Diouf, a Senegalese, who is director of the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO. We discussed the world food situation. Mr. Diouf was very direct, asking me, how is it that not long ago Vietnam was importing food, but is now a major exporter of rice? We discussed many ideas about the difficulties African countries faced in agricultural production. In the end, I told the FAO director that Vietnam wanted to help its friends, but we were still too poor to send agricultural advisors to other countries. We tossed this around and came to an important idea, a tripartite cooperation where Vietnam would contribute the advisors, FAO would provide the major financial assistance for the advisors, and the host country would cover the advisors' on-site living expenses. We agreed the cooperation would begin with Senegal. I returned home, and a month later, a Senegalese agricultural delegation arrived to discuss plans with our Ministry of Agriculture. The two sides quickly settled everything except the entangling question of salaries for the Vietnamese advisors. Several ministries, including the Finance Ministry and the Ministry of Labor, War Invalids, and Social Affairs held that since these were international consultants, their salaries should be high. However, in reality at that time, we had only a few credentialed agricultural experts. Most of the consultants we could send were only mid-level technicians. In addition, Mr. Diouf and I had envisioned a cooperative project in a spirit of solidarity and mutual assistance. The Prime Minister of Senegal telephoned, asking me to intervene. I phoned directly to Prime Minister Vo Van Kiet. He agreed immediately with my point of view and directed Deputy Prime Minister Nguyen Song Tan to solve the problem of salaries for Vietnamese agricultural advisors in Senegal. I was delighted to find my initiative backed by a governmental policy for this project had value not only for our friends, but also for us. Further, we had precisely followed a political route by implementing South-South cooperation according to the orientation of the non-aligned movement. 2 years after beginning the cooperation, the Senegalese government was delighted because its rice production had increased 3 to 4 times. Hearing this news, many other countries raised with Vietnam the issue of agricultural cooperation using the Senegalese model. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The major diplomatic event I remember most clearly from that time was the 7th meeting of the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie in 1997 in Hanoi. The Francophone member nations took turns hosting the conference. We were reluctant when it was Vietnam's turn because this would be our first time hosting a high-level conference. Participants would all be heads of state. We knew we would have trouble with the basics, yet refusing would bring a loss of prestige. And so, in 1995, we joined hands and began to prepare. Most important, we needed a large meeting hall. With assistance from France and Canada, by the beginning of 1997, we had built a conference center at 11 Lu Hong Phong Street, Hanoi. At that time, this was the city's most spacious meeting hall with suitable accommodations. Other pressing arrangements included preparing conference documents, lodging, meals, and transporting 50 heads of state. The organizing committee headed by Deputy Prime Minister Nguyen saw that every detail was in place, according to plan, by the opening day of the meeting. By this time, Comrade Le Duc was no longer president. Comrade Tran Duc Luong had succeeded him. We held the conference opening ceremony at the Soviet Friendship Palace and the working sessions at 11 Lu Hong Phong. The opening ceremony was a solemn affair. The organizing committee presented its formal welcome and announced the reason for the meeting. Then we had a small performance to welcome the representatives. 20 children, 10 boys and 10 girls between the ages of 10 and 12, came on stage, dressed in Vietnamese ceremonial robes. They folded their arms across their chests and bowed in the traditional way that Vietnamese children greet their elders. Then the children sang in French. We children dream of the day. They were so endearing. The distinguished heads of state were delighted. After that, President Tran Duc Luong gave his opening speech in French. Then President Chirac replied on behalf of the guests. 55 state representatives, with most of them presidents or prime ministers, participated in the summit. Many heads of state were visiting Vietnam for the first time. Several representatives said, "I've heard so much about Vietnam. I wanted to visit and learn about the people and country so famous for bravery." I was assigned to preside at the meetings since Vietnam was the conference host. Comrade Tran Duc Du, Vietnam's representative to the Executive Committee of the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie, returned from Paris to assist me. The conference faced several difficult issues, including the choice of the Secretary General to succeed Mr. Boutros Ghali, who had completed 2 terms. That question was settled outside in the corridors. The greatest challenge in chairing the meeting was managing the time. In the summits that I had attended, the chair was usually light-handed, especially when the large countries had the floor. As a result, the smaller countries wasted many hours waiting for their turns to speak. Right from the start, I diplomatically encouraged our distinguished guests to honor our program and allotted work times. My attitude was mild and friendly, but created additional respect and consideration from the guests for the chair. The meals outside the conference hall were gracious, and travel to sites went smoothly. The reception at the Presidential Palace and the performance in Hanoi's Municipal Theater both created a good impression. The delegates appreciated Vietnam's national culture and our hospitality. The success of the Hanoi Summit of the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie helped many countries, including those visiting Vietnam for the first time, understand more about our nation. They saw that Vietnam, a country with a tradition of resisting powerful foreign aggressors, was developing quickly. They perceived that Vietnam had a policy of friendship, cooperation, and openness. Also, they experienced our unique, long-standing culture. Many foreign journalists covering the summit published articles and relayed broadcasts about Vietnam. Perhaps we could say that the 7th Summit contributed decisively to lifting Vietnam's status in the international arena. At this meeting, Senegalese President Abdou Diouf thanked our leaders for assistance, with great results in agricultural development. The president of Mali made known his wish for assistance. Following this meeting, French President Chirac increased his close relationship with Vietnam. Many times when on assignment to France, I would arrange to meet President Chirac for a courtesy visit. He always received me with great warmth. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Within the Politburo, President Le Duc was assigned responsibility for the judicial system. At that time, public opinion was expressing dissatisfaction with our courts and jails. In 1995, the president asked me to represent him in examining and evaluating our legal offices in the localities. In truth, only after we'd had peace for some years did our leaders begin to concentrate on our legal system. Our Ministry of Justice had been reorganized in 1980. In comparison with the public security system, we had relatively few court officials, few staff in investigative bureaus, and few lawyers. Furthermore, staff educational levels were low. Thus, the shortcomings were easy to understand. If we wanted to develop a strong country and build a state governed by the rule of law, then examination and evaluation of our current justice system was a serious and necessary step. My participation in many National Assembly sessions and now my role as Vice President helped me understand the judicial system's importance. A democratic state must be managed through a comprehensive, equitable justice system. Another important issue was that the people needed to understand their rights and responsibilities within the justice system. That step would require a long-term educational and mobilization process. To implement the major appraisal of the judicial system that President Le Duc had suggested, I put together a delegation composed of the President's dedicated judicial staff, Comrade Pham Hong, former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the deputy ministers from the Ministry of Public Security, the Ministry of Justice, and the People's Procuracy, as well as several others. We decided to work in 9 provinces from north to south. To ensure adequate participation from the judicial system itself, we would listen to the local authorities and justice officials' reports. We would then discuss and evaluate the unsettled local issues while we were on site. We saw clearly that, in general, the justice system offices were dismal. The courts at the local levels were shabby, lacking the commanding appearance appropriate for judicial offices representing the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. The provincial and district jails were generally abysmal. Further, the professional level of officials required great attention. In many areas, the level was low and inconsistent. In particular, there were too many emergency police arrests, and the redress and correction of cases in the courts at all levels had many shortcomings. Further, coordination between the justice system offices, the police, the People's Procuracy, and the courts was inadequate, particularly in the south of the country. After reviewing 9 provinces, I presented a report to the President about our country's judicial activities and recommended that we revamp our judicial system as soon as possible. I believe that the party and the state's subsequent judicial guidelines contain some of our contributions. During the inspection tour, we made recommendations for solving some issues on site. We found one situation at the Ministry of Public Security's jail in Hanoi, where a youth from outside the city had been sentenced to death but held in custody for 6 years without the sentence being carried out. The defendant and his family insisted on his innocence. Their appeal to a higher court had gone this way, and that without resolving the case. We recommended that if there were not sufficient evidence of a capital crime, then the court should reduce the sentence. The defendant should receive treatment like other prisoners. Later, I learned that the city's court reviewed the case, with its decision following our suggestions. In Ho Chi Minh City, We visited a jail in Siuchi district and met women who had been arrested for gambling. These women had made their living through engaging in petty trade by buying goods, which they resold from baskets hanging from their shoulder poles. Some of these detainees had small children. We met with the local comrades and suggested they give the women a warning, perhaps fine them, and release them. Whenever we went to jail, I would ask to meet the oldest prisoner and the youngest, the women prisoners, and those who had the highest education. In each case, I wanted to learn the reasons for their arrests. I remember when we went to Z.30, Swanmock, and I asked if any detainees had a high level of education. The guards told me one prisoner had a doctorate. I asked to meet this detainee, whose name was Mr. Nguyen. Older brother T had completed his doctoral research in the Soviet Union. He returned home to Vietnam because the situation in the Soviet Union at that time was not favorable. While he waited for a work assignment, his office suggested he take responsibility for a make-a-living enterprise to help his colleagues, who faced extreme economic difficulties. Older brother T had never been a businessman. With our tortuous economic system at that time, it was easy to understand that his enterprise failed. He was blamed for the failure. I felt very uncomfortable when I heard this. I asked older brother T whether he had anything to say. He answered calmly, "I made a mistake. I must bear the consequences." He had been held in prison for nearly 5 years. After the inspection stage, we instituted a second stage of granting reprieves. I suggested that the Amnesty Council look again at older brother T's case. He received an early reprieve. Truly, it is a regretful practice to treat our officials that way and not help them do their work successfully. During the investigation in Baria, Vung Tau province, we heard reports about complicated cases. The port in this province had our largest oil and gas installations, which had brought prosperity. As a result, many Vietnamese and foreigners poured in, looking for economic opportunities. The situation was quite complicated, yet our visit was very short. We had little time to go deeply into issues and understand details. I worried about this. When we returned to Hanoi, Comrade Pham Hung and I asked the Supreme People's Procuracy to send us several files. These provided the basis for close, concrete guidance. Among the cases was the issue of TVB, an overseas Vietnamese whose home area was SOC Trang Province. He had returned from Holland to invest in Baria, Vung Tau's sea products and environmental tourism, even though the local leaders disagreed about his transgressions. The provincial legal office imposed its judgment. TVB's family sent appeals to many central-level offices. I had heard about this case. After checking, I found that the Baria, Vung Tau authorities' methodology did not follow the party and state's policies, particularly regarding overseas Vietnamese, whom we had urged to return and help rebuild the country. At that time, we were still working out our legal system. Our own citizens' engagement with our legal system met difficulties, but it was even more problematic for overseas Vietnamese. I felt that if returning overseas Vietnamese had not done anything terribly wrong or dangerous, then we should warn them and guide them toward better behavior. However, the police offices, the People's Procuracy, and the Supreme Court did not accept my suggestions. Many Vietnamese journalists disagreed with the legal decisions regarding TVB's case and covered his story. There was also a great deal of public discussion among Vietnamese in foreign countries. Comrade Pham Hung, who was then the legal advisor to President Tran Duc Luong, and I tried to explain this point to the party leaders, but to no avail. In the end, I decided I must use my rights as a National Assembly representative. During a session in May 1998, I stood up and raised the issue with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. requesting that the National Assembly Standing Committee address the matter. Comrade Nguyen Duc Man, then the president of the National Assembly, recorded my request. After that, he assigned the Legal Affairs Committee to supervise the case, but the committee did not address the case seriously. It did not clarify the issues, instead causing prolongation and further complications. I think I took the correct position in terms of conscience and responsibility. Many people agreed with my attitude, yet others felt differently and asked, "Why do you champion TVB? Have you ever met him?" I answered them directly, "No, I have never met him." Still, we must apply the law correctly according to the person and the offense. Later, I learned that the government finally reviewed this case. At that point, everyone said, if earlier we'd listened to older Sister Ben, then we wouldn't have this mess. I finished my first term as vice president and was elected to continue for a second term. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. During this time, my family experienced a great sorrow. After my younger brother, Ha, returned from Con Dao Prison Island, he set about moving and restoring the altar to Elder Fan Chao Trin. He chose a place closer to the site where Elder Fan had been buried 60 years before. The new site was more spacious and more appropriate for honoring a great patriot. After finishing this work, Ha fell ill. Comrades in the health sector did their best, but couldn't save Ha from serious illness. I was bereft because Ha and I never did have the chance to live near each other, as we had when we were young. I had never been able to take him to visit the revolutionary bases and resistance sites where he had worked so that he could see once again his close friends from those days. However, at that time, I did achieve something that would have delighted my husband, where he's still alive. I was able to help our son, Tang, do graduate studies overseas for 2 years. That study provided Tang with useful knowledge and experience for his later work. Some years before, when I was at the Paris conference, Tang was chosen to study in the Soviet Union or the German Democratic Republic. Kang and I discussed this and decided Tang should not go. Instead, we reasoned he should study at home for more rooted training. We sent him to the Nguyen Military University. Tang graduated and wanted to continue his studies overseas, but securing a place was difficult. My friends can easily continue their study overseas, he said, because they already have degrees from abroad, but I studied at home. I heard this as blame, even though Tang had never complained. He worked for many years here and there in mechanical engineering jobs. Finally, he was able to study overseas. He improved his educational level and shifted into economics and finance, the new branches of knowledge that our society badly needed. I was delighted we could repair part of a rigid decision my husband and I had made years before. During my second term as vice president, I had more experience. At the direction of President Tran Duc Luong, who had succeeded Le Duc On, I continued to concentrate on education, social affairs, and emulation awards and commendations. In 2001, I handled a matter I can never forget. One day, I was on my way to a Central-Level Party meeting to which I had been invited as a special guest, when I ran into an elderly man with white hair. I did not recognize him initially, but then realized he was a doctor I'd known 40 years before. He had brought a farmer to see me. When I heard the farmer's story, I understood immediately why this friend from years before had sought me out. In Binh Tre province, a youth named Nguyen Van Em, the son of Nguyen Van Oot, the farmer who had come see me, was accused of raping and killing a woman. The court sentenced the young man to death, and the execution was to be carried out in 4 days. Nguyen Van Em's family and friends held that he'd been the victim of injustice. So they had gone hither and yon, seeking intervention. I was not yet clear about the case, but I knew my friend, the doctor, to be honest and careful. We had known each other when he was a member of the State Committee on Forensic Medicine. I also knew that if the accused were executed, there would be no opportunity for redress. As soon as I arrived at the central-level party meeting, I sought out Nguyen Duc Man, who by then was party general secretary. I explained the situation and presented Nguyen Van Uit's petition to delay execution and re-examine the case. Here in my proposal, Comrade Nguyen Duc Man agreed and asked the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who was present at the meeting, to send an urgent directive to the Binh Provincial Court. The intervention prevented the execution. After that, I suggested that the courts and legal offices at both the central level and the locality review the case. From my point of view, if there were insufficient evidence or if the evidence had been misplaced, then the sentence should be revoked or lessened. Also, we needed to open ways for elderly and young defendants. I was pleased because I had followed my conscience and had helped an impoverished farming family overcome a disaster. After that incident, I continued to remind comrades in the locality to scrutinize this case and resolve it exactly according to the law. In my role as vice president, I took situations regarding officials' misbehavior to the responsible offices, but I was also rigorous about the good comrades who had been falsely accused. Not all my interventions were effective, but I did try my best to be responsible. During my 10 years as vice president, I was also concerned with culture and social affairs. Comrade Vudong, deputy director of the office of the president and now a deputy foreign minister, and I raised with President Liu Duc On and the Politburo the issue of restoring emulation commendations and awards, which had fallen into abeyance. Many people said that competition in the market economy created emulation. However, we thought differently. We felt we needed emulation not only to affirm competition for profit, but also for patriotism and solidarity. We needed to highlight situations of mutual progress to encourage us to overcome difficulties for each person, regardless of wealth or status. We felt this point was needed in the management of our society. The Politburo instituted Directive 35 regarding emulation commendations and awards. After a short time, a patriotic emulation movement spread everywhere. Prime Minister Phan Van Khai chaired the Central Level Council on Emulation Commemorations and Awards, while I served as First Deputy Chair. In 2000, we organized the first National Emulation Congress, which was lively and successful. I was delighted to find many worthy sisters among the labor heroes from renovation, including Captain Nguyen Xuan Hong, perhaps the only woman commanding a ship in Vietnam. During the fierce typhoon of 1998, Ms. Hong braved tall waves to rescue dozens of fishermen. Another example was Sister Tran Thi Duong, director of Phong Po Textile Company, one of our most prosperous textile companies. And then there was Tran Ngoc Xuong, director of the song How Farm in Kindo. She had followed her father as a labor hero by establishing a large state farm, which increased the living standards of several thousand farming families. I can say that the women chosen for emulation were truly skilled and as deserving as the men. Recently, some of the leaders of the song How Farm, including Ms. Xuong, were accused of financial mismanagement. I heard many contradictory views in the public discussion. I'm not clear about the details, but I believe that with economic activities during the difficult times under our old system, we assigned people tasks but did not provide the assistance and constant monitoring necessary to flag problems early. Then when the situation became serious, we would sue, pass a cold verdict to solve a situation, and condemn people. But where was our responsibility? Were such actions reasonable and appropriate? In truth, I did not agree. I believe truth will eventually win. In 1994, the party and state issued a directive honoring heroic Vietnamese mothers. This step which President Le Duc proposed, received widespread support, although some people said the idea was long overdue. After 20 years, many mothers worthy of recognition had passed on. Nevertheless, this directive brought deep meaning, pride, and comfort to thousands of families. Two localities with many heroic mothers were Quang, Nam Province, my ancestral home, and Siu Chi District, the land of steel, in Ho Chi Minh City. The responsible authorities were the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Labor, War Invalids, and Social Affairs, and the Central Level Council on Emulation Commemorations and Awards. As representative for the President, I received many heroic mothers, most of whom were impoverished and lonely. Mother Nguyen T. Thursday from Dien Bon, Quang Nam Province, had lost her husband and 10 children and grandchildren. This was also the ancestral home of Nguyen Van Troy and Chun T. Lee. Perhaps across the world, few families have experienced so great a loss. When I heard about the lives of these mothers, I felt even more strongly about this point. In war, women endure the greatest sacrifice. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I also reserve time to work on the issue of children, particularly those with difficulties and handicaps. The law of care, education, and protection of children went into effect in 1991, along with the decision to establish the Child Protection Fund to mobilize the people's contributions along with state assistance for this important cause. I was invited to serve as the fund's president. Several retired ministers and deputy ministers, including Goma Le Sun Jing, Zhen Ti Tang Tang, Le Hui Gon, and others, served on the Fund's Council. After 15 years, the Fund continues to grow in strength and has brought assistance to thousands of unfortunate children with disabilities, including victims of Agent Orange, through programs such as 1,000 Smiles, A Childish Twinkle, limb surgery, and more recently, Young Hearts. Truly, nothing could give me greater joy and happiness than work, albeit small, that saves lives. I will always remember visiting a surgical program in Ho Chi Minh City for children who have been blind from birth. A youngster about 12 years old came up and hugged me, saying, "Grandmother, Grandmother, I beg you, help my blind younger sister to have surgery like me." We in our delegation all had tears in our eyes. When we arrived at the ophthalmology hospital in Da Nang, we met a mother hugging her 2-year-old, who just had surgery in one eye for a birth defect cataract. The child was awaiting surgery on the other eye. The mother wept, saying, for the first time, "My child has seen her mother." My heart leapt with joy. I feel special affection and sympathy for children with cleft palates. Some youngsters of 13 or 14 had always remained inside their houses, refusing to go out because of awkwardness and self-pity. I was delighted when they could have surgery through 1,000 smiles. Indeed, smiles appeared on the children's faces. Yet after surgery, some children still spoke with lisps and faced cruel teasing from schoolmates. We found an expert and set up a project addressing pronunciation. Although we were not 100% successful, we did help many children have a more normal life. The program for heart surgery came about later because the surgery was sophisticated and expensive. For many reasons, the number of children born with heart defects is rather high. Without early intervention, it is difficult for those children to live. We did everything we could in that difficult work. My greatest sorrow, affection, and sympathy are for children affected by Agent Orange. Nearly half of them live with severe handicaps, such as brain damage and leg paralysis, which cannot be treated. It rends my heart when I see the mothers who have been holding handicapped children in their arms for 30 years. These mothers and fathers usually come from poor families. Surely across the world, there is no place where people must bear such pain. In 1998, we organized the Fund for Assistance to Victims of Agent Orange, which belonged to the Vietnamese Red Cross. I was introduced to serve as honorary chair. The director was Dr. Lu Chao Dai, whom one could call a hero. He had been courageous in his service in the South during the American War. After the war, he dedicated himself to Agent Orange victims. And then in the end, he passed on, possibly because of the effects of Agent Orange. In February 2002, I took part in the United Nations conference to report on Vietnam's 10 years of implementing the Convention on the Rights of the Child. This was my second visit to the United States. In 1991, I had visited the States as president of the Vietnam Union of Peace, Friendship, and Solidarity Organizations to join a conference of American NGOs working in Vietnam. That conference of people's organizations was very favorable for us. During our trip, we stayed in the homes of American families who had supported Vietnam during the war. American veterans escorted us wherever we went. We visited several residential areas of American veterans in remote, rural areas of California. These veterans had been demobilized long before, but their employment status was insecure, their incomes marginal, and their housing minimal. Nevertheless, when we arrived, these families gathered together and greeted us with great warmth. My second visit to the United States was as Vietnam's vice president. By then, we had fully normalized diplomatic relations. Many countries supported our report on implementing the Convention on the Rights of the Child. They were particularly interested in our organizational model because our Committee for Care, Education, and Protection of Children linked various ministries and branches as appropriate to the state's national goals. The other delegations found our model an interesting experiment with good results. It is a great loss that we did not keep this model, but instead reorganized and divided the issue of children among various ministries. We have lost the concentration. The current results do not equal earlier outcomes. Our delegation visited Washington and met with a State Department representative. We also met again American friends from the anti-war movement, including Merle Ratner. In 1991, Merle had organized a meeting of nearly 300 people from many localities. Some traveled a distance of 600 kilometers. The two bodyguards who had accompanied our delegation stood on either side of the door as we entered the meeting hall. Merle led a dozen people, who greeted us in song. We caught the words as they repeated the chorus. Live like her, Madame Binh. Dare to struggle, dare to win. Dying Bien Phu will come again, live like her, Madame Binh. Spirit of Vietnam. Stronger than U.S. bombs, spirit of Vietnam, stronger than U.S. bombs. Are any Vietnamese lyrics more beautiful? Our dear American friends, whose hair was turning white, remained as deeply committed and sympathetic with Vietnam as in the old days. At that time, in 1991, we were still mobilizing to end the U.S. embargo and normalize diplomatic relations between the United States and Vietnam. When I made my request, the entire meeting hall was astir. Everyone shouted, "Now! Now!" Many women came up to take my hands and embrace me. In July 2002, I finished my second term as vice president in a favorable light. I felt I had completed my assigned tasks. Before that, in April 2002, I had been honored with the Ho Chi Minh Medal. I am grateful to the comrades who gave good reviews of my contributions and who honored and encouraged me with this very special award. Retired and busy. After 50 years of activism, I thought that perhaps the time had come to retire. I would care for my family and go visiting with friends. However, however, the country's situation remained unsettled. Officials and the people were better off than before, but many Vietnamese were still living in difficult straits. The Cold War had ended, but the arms race continued. Armed conflicts and wars of aggression exploded here and there. One could say that, worldwide, there has never been a day of peace. I boiled with anger at the Iraq War, which destroyed that country. The conflicts between nation-states and classes of people continue. The large countries still oppress and dominate the small countries. They squeeze the developing nations economically. Workers remain poor. International political activists point out that the disparity between the rich and poor widens, with the rich growing richer and the poor poorer. These international and domestic situations have affected our people's spirit. Although most Vietnamese are worried, they believe our people's choice has been correct and that we must continue on the road we have chosen, but with adjustments. However, others are alarmed. They believe we have lost our direction. They are pessimistic and even stand in opposition. Our material life is much better, but in general our society has become far more complicated. People say the wartime days were cruel and difficult yet simpler. Many people speak about our cultural decline, which is truly worrying. Ethical and moral standards have collapsed. The current tendency is to follow individual interests and race after money and status. That tendency is increasing. When a society is changing, its general psychological character can become confused and wavering. Our society needs to follow established laws. We need to be straightforward, acknowledging that we have just passed through a very long war and that thus we lag behind neighboring nations in many fields. Could it be that the party and state paid too much attention to economic matters and too little to cultural affairs, to the quality of people's lives, to the structure of our society? When will we have a society that is truly democratic, equal, and cultured? These dynamics continue to harass me. I can't sit still. I must continue to take full part in life. And so, my years since official retirement have been very busy, at times even busier than before. Perhaps it is my fate from when I was young. I want always to be deeply involved and committed in my work. I don't know how to stand on the outside. The year of 2003 began with a series of fascinating activities. One of these involved the 30th anniversary into the signing of the Paris Peace Agreement on Vietnam, January 27th, 1973. On January 25th, 2003, I took part in a conference in Paris with the theme, The Vietnam War in Europe. Academic comrades Bùi Van Ton, historian at the Social Sciences Institute, and Dr. Nguyen Thatch, expert at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Institute of International Relations, joined me. The French Center for Strategic and Diplomatic Studies organized the event with financial assistance from the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The keynote speakers among the 100 participants were primarily researchers in politics and history from European countries and from the United States. In addition to our delegation, the organizers had invited Bùi Diem, the ambassador from the Republic of Vietnam, South Vietnam, to the United States in 1967 and 1968. The speakers presented information, documents, and analyses of the attitudes of European countries toward the American war in Vietnam. In general, these presentations were objective and concentrated on events, legal documents, and official government pronouncements. Of course, each person had his or her own individual viewpoint, with the result that the conference portrayed many different angles. In particular, the participants looked at the huge movement opposing the American war in Vietnam, not just the communist parties and the leftists in France, Italy, and other countries, but also the socialist parties of Northern Europe, especially in Sweden. They spoke about the peace forces among the religious groups, particularly the Christians. They also mentioned the strong attitude of Europe's intelligentsia, including those who had participated in the Bertrand Russell Tribunal. During the American War against Vietnam, European governments did not allow the United States to pull them in, even though the Americans wanted NATO countries to participate, if only symbolically. Some participants at the conference affirmed that the American war in Vietnam had caused Europe, the old continent, to grow farther away from the United States on the new continent. Many French speakers mentioned former President de Gaulle's statement in 1966 and the French government's contributions in facilitating negotiations at the Paris Conference on Vietnam. Bui Diem and I were the two key representatives of the Vietnamese sides. We had no personal conflict, but of course our 2 points of view were entirely different. Bui Diem could not accept the name American War because, he said, the war was between nationalists and communists. He held that the Republic of Vietnam was the nationalist side, with support from the United States, while we were the communists in the socialist faction with support from the Soviet Union and China. In addition, he said, the communist victory had relied on violence in drastic ways, causing countless deaths and massive destruction. I tried to control myself. I read my prepared speech, presenting our system and processes as they developed in resisting American aggression. I described the principles of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam and the National Liberation Front / Provisional Revolutionary Government of the Republic of South Vietnam, which we had established in order to secure independence and reunification, just as we had done during our war of resistance against French colonialism from 1945 until 1954. I spoke strongly. The strength of our resistance came from our patriotic spirit and the solidarity of all our people. Those who were communists stood at the forefront in the resistance and sacrificed the most for the homeland and our people. That is the truth, which no one can deny. One participant at the conference asked, "Don't documents show that 300,000 Chinese troops arrived to fight alongside your army?" I answered, "The Chinese people helped Vietnam both politically and materially, but only the Vietnamese Liberation Army fought in the South." The conference lasted 2 days. Surely, we will organize many more international conferences and write many books and magazine articles in various countries in the effort to understand our resistance war against the United States, for this was a major event during the 20th century. A little more than a month later, the Vietnamese Foreign Ministry also organized a conference for the 30th anniversary of the signing of the Paris Agreement with the goal of drawing lessons from our experiences in diplomatic struggle. Our meaningful lessons included the use of sound negotiating principles, our diplomatic timing, the coordination between diplomacy and the battlefield, and our use of international solidarity, especially with the Soviet Union and China. There is also this question. In 1954, should Vietnam have continued its resistance to the end in order to liberate the entire country and reunite the nation? Stopping with the Geneva Agreement forced us to accept division at the 17th parallel. Do we cast aside the opportunity to avoid another war? As I see it, the Geneva Agreement reflected the situation that embodied the advantages and disadvantages of the two sides in 1954. It also allowed us to see the complicated international relationships at that time. As a result, we could ensure that the Paris Agreement was more complete and more rigorous, because we could incorporate the valuable experience and lessons we had drawn from the Geneva Agreement. This assessment reflects the skilled leadership of our party and the strength of our people. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. From 2003 until 2013 and the 40th anniversary of the signing of the Paris Agreement, Many international political activists and historians were researching and evaluating the American war in Vietnam. They will continue to do so for many years. The questions they ask again and again include, why did the United States invade Vietnam? What was the source of the Vietnamese people's victory? Might it have been possible for the war to end earlier? What was the intention behind the Paris Agreement? And so on. Through many conferences and many individual conversations, I've had occasion to engage in dialogue and to explain the answers. Several years ago, in a speech, Mr. Henry Kissinger accepted the U.S. failure. The causes, he said, with a lack of a clear U.S. purpose and a lack of support within the United States. A number of experts on the United States and the war in Vietnam hold that the United States engaged in the war from 1961 to 1964 with the aim of limiting the communists in accordance with principle. ES operative during the Cold War. Then, in 1967, when the United States saw that the war in Vietnam was not based on directives from Russia and China, the Americans' purpose was only to help South Vietnam stand up and to keep South Vietnam from falling into the hands of the communist North Vietnamese. That's when the United States thought about withdrawing its troops and Vietnamizing the war. This is a simplistic explanation for a war that lasted 20 years, destroyed a country, and killed several million people. For us, the U.S. purpose was clear. The purpose was to change South Vietnam into a colony according to a new American model and to limit communism in Southeast Asia. However, the United States did not have the right to transform the war into an invasion. That was a violation of international law, a violation of a nation's rights, and a violation of the legitimate choice a nationality had made. Because of these violations, the Americans were immediately opposed both inside the country and across the world. This dynamic is the primary source of the American defeat. In truth, France was like the United States in not understanding our history and the Vietnamese people. These are the basic reasons both wars of invasion met defeat. As to the relationship between South Vietnam and North Vietnam, they should remember that in 1945, following the August Revolution, the Vietnamese people from north to south stood up and seized their independence, choosing for themselves the route of a democratic republic. Thus, when the United States destroyed the 1954 Geneva Agreement and established the Saigon administration, the people in the South had to continue their resistance, with assistance from the North, in order to complete the unfinished goal of securing independence and reunification of our homeland. And so, how then can anyone say that the North invaded the South? Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In April 2003, several comrades and I organized the Vietnam Foundation for Peace and Development to respond to the nation's needs and duties in our new situation with renovation. Peace is the great wish of every nation, but particularly of Vietnam, which bore decades of continuous war. Only if we have peace can we develop our nation and assure security and contentment for our people. Vietnam is an active participant in the World Peace Movement and a member of the World Peace Council. These movements contributed a great deal to our victory in the war against American aggression. These days, we must continue to struggle to protect peace for our own interests and for the world's people, developing our nation in a globalized world, which the strong and wealthy countries control, is a difficult assignment filled with challenges. We must quickly learn from the experience of other countries and work in solidarity with widespread and equal cooperation. We must use fair and skillful competition, while also opposing oppression from adversaries. Vietnam is now a member of the large economic, financial, and commercial institutions. This development should create more favorable conditions for economic development, although we must also overcome new challenges. Even though the Vietnam Foundation for Peace and Development has had challenges in terms of personnel and financing in previous years, we have contributed to our country's development. I am indebted to and appreciative of the Foundation's executive committee members who have been committed and responsible. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. At the end of 2003, a delegation from the Association of International Democratic Lawyers visited Vietnam. This international organization had zealously supported our wartime people's struggle against the United States. In particular, this group helped shape the famous Bertrand Russell International Tribunal, which in 1967 raised accusations against the Americans' cruelty in Vietnam, including the use of chemical warfare. The leader of this delegation was Mr. Sharma, an Indian and longtime friend of Vietnam. Like other international democratic organizations, this association did not have the financial means to be as active as before even, though its members are prestigious lawyers from many countries, including the United States. The visiting delegation was concentrating on the after effects of war. These lawyers said our people had the right to sue the United States for damages resulting in so much pain and loss in Vietnam. They pointed out that the war's after effects are still serious, particularly the effects of Agent Orange. All American veterans who served in Vietnam between 1962 and 1975 were deemed to have been exposed to Agent Orange, even if only indirectly. They are eligible to receive assistance from the U.S. government. Thus, the lawyers said, there is no reason for the United States not to accept responsibility for damages inflicted on the Vietnamese people. They suggested that we needed to establish immediately an association for victims of Agent Orange to represent the rights of the several million Vietnamese plaintiffs. On January 10, 2004, we formally established the Vietnamese Association of Victims of Agent Orange, VAVA, with Lieutenant General Dang Vu Hiep as president. He was a veteran who had spent 10 years fighting in the Central Highlands, an area the Americans had heavily sprayed. I was invited to serve as the association's honorary chair. On January 30, 2004, the association represented the victims of Agent Orange in suing the 37 American chemical companies that had produced the defoliants, such as Agent Orange and its impurity, dioxin. The United States had sprayed the defoliants on forests and fields in South Vietnam, with the poison affecting several million Vietnamese, including warriors and ordinary people. Thousands had died. Countless victims have disabilities. Even more painful and more prolonged are the victims, both men and women, who gave birth to children and then even had grandchildren with severe disabilities. Taken together, this greatest cruelty from the American war and the war's most toxic residue have created the huge debt that U.S. authorities owe the Vietnamese people. The case was heard in a New York court, which did not rule in Vietnam's favor. Then the case was appealed. We know we must prolong this difficult struggle, which requires determination and firmness. However, now, world public opinion understands the serious after effects of the 30-Year War. 1945 to 1975, the United States perpetrated on Vietnam. The legal case kindled an international movement supporting Vietnamese Agent Orange victims. Many people perceive this as the world's struggle for peace and justice to stop war and stop the use of the arms, including biological and chemical weapons, that kill masses of people. Unfortunately, American courts have refused to settle in our favor regarding the cruel U.S. actions in Vietnam. Nevertheless, the Association of International Democratic Lawyers announced, Humanity's Court of Conscience has decided Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I continue to serve as chair of the Fund for the Protection of Children, as president of the Fund for the Kovalovsky Prize, and as president of the Phan Chau Trinh Cultural Foundation. In addition to these activities, I cannot refuse to work in education and training, which I consider the keys to development. Under the auspices of the Vietnam Foundation for Peace and Development, I have sponsored research on educational methodology and, with my foundation brothers and sisters, have organized informal discussions and conferences on education in hopes of contributing to this crucial cause. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. My younger siblings and my children keep reminding me that I must retire. However, I cannot abide a passing day when I do not work, as long as I'm still able to contribute. My hopes and happiness reside in my two grandchildren, Long paternal and Dong maternal. Both have been assiduous students. Long is studying banking and finance at a university in Great Britain. When he returns to Vietnam, he hopes to work on national financial policy in a state office. Such a wish is not easy to implement, but I am supportive and encouraging. Dong has chosen architecture and wants to learn the skills needed to rebuild his grandparents' house. That's also a beautiful vision. I am pleased and happy that, even though I have retired, I am fortunate to have many friends come to visit. In addition, every day there are new friends, brothers and sisters, who come to share their confidences with me and ask for my ideas on shared questions and private matters. On my 80th birthday, Comrade Vu Q, a friend and brother who was then over 90, presented me with a beautiful pair of parallel sentences. Vietnam has not only men of gifts, Teho also has a woman of talent. The year 2006 was special for my family, for we commemorated the 80th year of the passing of Elder Phan Chau Trinh, my maternal grandfather. We organized two seminars, one in Da Nang and one in Ho Chi Minh City. In 1994, the state had designated Elder Phan's temple a national cultural and historical site. In 2006, we organized a large commemoration ceremony at the temple. Participants included Elder Phan's many descendants, our friends, representatives of the Ho Chi Minh City Department of Culture and Information, and officials from the Tan Binh District Office of Culture and Information. The workshop involved historians from research institutes and universities. It clarified and unified assessment of Elder Phan's important political role. Some people held contrary ideas. They objected, for they worried that lifting up Elder Phan would diminish the great status of President Ho Chi Minh. I completely disagreed. Evaluating each event and actor during our country's complicated 20th century history is difficult. However, time will permit us gradually to lift up and perceive historical truths clearly, precisely and calmly. We can explore each person's role in defining the principles for the founding of our nation. We can determine each person's influence at decisive times and afterwards, even a very long time afterwards. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I began writing this memoir in the beginning of 2007 when I turned 80. I finished it at the end of 2009. After I'd set down my pen, I still had many conflicting thoughts, a jostling of worries and hopes. We can perhaps say that my generation is the last of the Vietnamese who took part in our two resistance wars, and who, after 30 years of constant struggle, were still alive and could contribute to healing the wounds of war and to rebuilding our nation. We are more fortunate than many of our brothers and sisters, our comrades who died along the way for the cause. I have come to understand the pain of war and the difficulty of establishing peace. My own life, in concert with the life of our nation, has helped me understand that seizing political power and demanding independence were extremely difficult, particularly when opposing the colonialists and imperialists. However, maintaining political power and building a nation, particularly a nation fitting the people's wishes and hopes for a truly pure life of freedom and happiness, is much more difficult. Nelson Mandela, the preeminent South African political leader, said, "For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others." We in Vietnam must draw upon our human resources so that our people can use their own self-determination and capabilities to build an independent and free nation. I hope that at some time not long from now, we will have a generation of Vietnamese with sufficient self-confidence, humanity, and intelligence to create a democratic and cultured society in a strong country, which the Vietnamese have built from their own self-direction and with their own hands. For this reason, I continue to suggest that the party and state implement a basic and comprehensive reform of our educational system, thereby also improving our national culture and our nation's future. Education remains the most decisive factor in our nation's success. If there is an issue on which I concentrate and about which I worry, it is the question of our nation's internal strength. We made it through a war of national liberation, which was extremely cruel and lasted for so long. The war pushed our country's economy to its lowest ebb and severely injured our nation's culture and society. We lacked trained administrators with expertise in economics, technology, education, culture, and management. Perhaps speaking from the piles of ashes, we can move forward with the wish to build a developed country, returning to us a life where all our people have their basic needs met, are free and content. We strive toward that goal, which is totally appropriate. But the road is filled with obstacles and challenges in a world now brimming with serious conflicts on every side, particularly regarding economics and technology. We understand that we must protect our political independence with economic independence and national defense security, but above all, with an independent economy. Thus, in order to protect our independence and national rights, and in order to develop our country, we have no other route than the necessity of establishing a strong, independent, and sustainable economy that is not beholden to anyone, that is cooperative but is not dependent on any other nation. Our spirit of patriotism and the unification of people must be strong in self-sufficiency and labor to build our country, so that our own internal national strength becomes stronger. Our own internal strength must build a democratic society, a nation of laws and justice, using the strength of our people's heart and their unity to create the base for all our various strengths. Our nation has never before had such advantages and resources. Many people say we have a golden opportunity. However, life is such that when opportunities are greater, challenges are also greater. Can we overcome our challenges and achieve the objectives and dreams of the generations who sacrificed everything to bring us to where we are today? The answer rests with the comrades, the brothers and sisters who bear heavy leadership responsibilities. The answer also rests with our people, and especially with our youth, the primary force building and defending our homeland. I believe in the destiny of our homeland, a country and nationality which has struggled in heroic sacrifice during our long history. Our homeland has earned a right to a splendid future. Surely we Vietnamese have the strength and will to create that future. Those who lead our country must accept that responsibility, while the youngest generation must prepare to shoulder responsibility for the future. We must remember our ancestors' priceless historical lessons. We must place shared interests first. Regardless of hardships, we must strictly follow the chosen way to assure our people's freedom and contentment. Then, the happiness of our nation will become our children's happiness. I like to compare our homeland to a small riverboat carrying all Vietnamese. Despite countless whirlpools, our homeland will reach the sea and a new horizon. Completed, end of 2009. Supplemented, 2013 to 2015. Chronology. 1927 Tân Hiệp Commune, Sa Đéc District, Đồng Tháp Vin, Bất Niệm, Nguyễn Thị Châu Sa, Đa Gu Tớp Mr. Nguyễn Đồng Hải, 1900, 1969, and Moet. Din Kang, mother passes away. 1944 participates in Overseas Vietnamese Patriots Association in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. May 1945 moves back to Saigon with family. Doi Viet Minh. August 25, 1945 August Revolution in Saigon. Saigon Revolutionary Administration and Saigon Provisional Committee seize political power in Saigon. September 2nd, 1945 Declaration of Independence event in Saigon. Saigon Revolutionary Administration and Saigon Provisional Committee organize a large meeting in Notre Dame Square in concert with Ho Chi Minh's reading of Vietnam's Declaration of Independence in Hanoi, announcing formation of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, DRVN. September 23rd, 1945 French troops with American weapons arrive on British ships and attack the newly formed Viet Minh administration in Saigon. War of resistance against France begins in Saigon and then spreads throughout Vietnam's southern region. January 6th, 1945, serves as Secretary of Resistance Committee, Hong Ngoc District, Dong Thap Province. Takes part in independent Vietnam's first general election. May 1946 returns to Saigon, joins Secret Activities, Association of Women for National Salvation, Association of Youth for National Salvation, etc. Takes alias Yen Sa. November 1946 French invade Hai Phong northern port city and then push toward Hanoi, the DRVN capital. December 19th, 1946 President Ho Chi Minh promulgates his call for nationwide resistance. War of resistance against France spreads across all of Vietnam. 1948 joins Indo-Chinese Communist Party. 1949 works as party grassroots organizer with lawyer Nguyen. April 1951 year. LY 1954 arrested as a spy. Intervention by high-level French associates of her grandfather, Phan Chau Trinh, in Paris prevents her execution. Held in Chi Hoa prison. Saigon. November 1954 arrives in the north as part of regrouping after the Geneva Agreement. Works as Secretary for President of the Central Level. National Women's Union. December 1st, 1954 marries Mr. Din Kang, a military engineer after a 9-year separation during the French War. 1956 Din Nam Thang's son is born. 1957 to 1959 studies at the Nguyen I Quoc Political Academy. 1960 Dinh Thuy Mai, Giao Gu. Tur is born. December 20th, 1960 establishment of the National Liberation Front, NLF, of South Vietnam. 1961 works for the Reunification Commission in Hanoi. Concentrates on NLF people-to-people diplomacy. Takes a new alias, Nguyen Thi Binh, Peace. 1962 to 1968 through NLF activities. Builds international support for Vietnam by lobbying with individuals, international organizations, and foreign governments. June 1962 attends World Democratic Students Congress in Budapest. Hangudi. July 1962 attends World Democratic Youth Congress in Leningrad, Soviet Union, now St. Petersburg, Russia. Late 1962 visits Indonesia. Meets President Sukarno and Dipanisarana Adit, General Secretary, Indonesian Communist Party. Professor Nguyen Van Hue, NLF Secretary General. Is head of delegation. March 1963 attends the Third Congress of the Asia-Africa Solidarity Committee in Tanzania as head of the NLF delegation. 1964 visits Indonesia for the second time. Late 1964 attends International Women's Congress as head of delegation representing the Women's Association from liberated areas of South Vietnam. 1967 meets representatives of the AM, American anti-war movement in Bratislava, Czechoslovakia, now the capital of Slovakia. November 4, 1968 arrives in Paris as deputy head of the NLF. Delegation to the Paris Conference on Vietnam. January 25th, 1969, official opening of the Paris Four-Sided Conference. April 1969, visits the United Kingdom, delivers a speech on the NLF at Trafalgar Square. Mai 1969 Pha Thơ, Nguyen Dong Hai. Passes away. May 8th, 1969 announces the NLF's 10-point position at Kleber International Convention Center, Paris. June 6, 1969 establishment of the Provisional Revolutionary Government, PRG, of the Republic of South Vietnam. Becomes foreign minister and head of the PRG delegation at the Paris Conference. Early 1970 visits Sweden at the invitation of Prime Minister Olof Palme. July 1970 official visit to India and Sri Lanka as PRG foreign minister. September 17, 1970 announces the PRG 8-point position demanding U.S. total withdrawal before June 30th. 1971. September 1970 travels to Lusaka, Zambia, to lobby for PRG's admission to the non-aligned movement. NAM. Early 1971 visits Cuba during Cuba's International Year for Vietnam. July 1st, 1971 announces the PRG's 7-point position demanding U.S. total withdrawal and establishment of a government of national concord. January 11th, 1972 announces the PRG's 2-point position, U.S. withdrawal and establishment of a coalition government consisting of the PRG, the Saigon administration, and the Third Force. March 1972 troops of the Liberation Army attack eastern regions of the South. September 1972 DRVN Special Advisor Luc Duc, though presents U.S. National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger with the draft Paris Agreement on ending the war and restoring peace in Vietnam. December 18th to 29th. 1972 United States bombs Hanoi and Haiphong with B-52s during what Westerners call the Christmas bombing and Vietnamese call Dien Bien Phu in the air. Vietnamese air defense shoots down or disables a significant percentage of the U.S. B-52 fleet. January 23rd, 1973 Luc Duc, though, and Henry Kissinger initial the Paris Agreement. 10 o'clock, January 27th. 1973, 32 documents of the Paris Agreement on ending the war and restoring peace in Vietnam are each signed by the foreign ministers of four nations. The DRVN, Nguyen Due Trinh. The PRG, Nguyen Thi Binh. The Republic of Vietnam, Tran Van Lam. And the United States of America, Williams P. Rogers. February 27th to March 2nd. 1973 International Conference on Vietnam in Paris. March 2nd, 1973 International Act on the International Conference on Vietnam, signed on March 2nd. 1973 by foreign ministers of 12 nations, DRVN, PRG, ROV, and the USA as signatories to the Paris Agreement, Canada, China, France, Great Britain, Hungary, Indonesia, Poland, and the Soviet Union as additional signatories to the International Act, with the UN Secretary-General present but not a signatory. April 1973 leaves Paris for Hanoi. April 1973. April 1975 continues work in formal diplomacy and people-to-people diplomacy. Lobbies governments and people's organizations for implementation of the Paris Agreement by the United States and the Saigon administration. July 1973, PRG achieves official admission T. O. The non-aligned movement, NAM. 1974 receives the Binh Barca Medal for Afro-Asian Solidarity. June 1974 visits Afghanistan to lobby for diplomatic recognition of the PRG. September 1974. Travels the Ho Chi Minh Trail as a member of the delegation led by PRG President of Government Nguyen Tan Phat for a visit to the Cambodian resistance movement against the U.S.-backed Lon Nol administration. April 30th. 1975 Liberation of the South. 65 governments have established formal relations with the PRG. May 1st, 1975 reunion after 21 years with her brother Nguyen. Dong Ha, just released from the tiger cages on Kon Son, Condao Island. May 13th, 1975 Saigon Grand Meeting to celebrate liberation of the South. June 17th. 1975 meeting between the NLF of the South, PRG, and Viet Nam Fatherland Front, DRVN. July 1975 Non-Aligned Movement, NAM, foreign ministers meeting in Lima, Peru. Lobbies for admission of the DRVN to NAM. October 1975 visits Arab states to borrow petrol, meets Saddam Hussein and manages to borrow 1.5 million tons of petrol at preferential interest rate. 1976 to 2002 elected a deputy to Vietnam's National Assembly, Vieth through XDH sessions. 1976 to 1987 Minister of Education. Unites the management of Vietnam's educational system. Organizes literacy training for the former South. Institutes expanded teacher training and a modernized curriculum. 1977 to 1978 thousands of northern teachers volunteer to teach in southern Vietnam. January 11th. 1979 Politburo promulgates Resolution 14 on educational reform. 1978 1979 Pol Pot genocide in Cambodia, Khmer into Western Vietnam. Southwest Border War with the Khmer Rouge begins. February 1979 China invades Vietnam's northern border provinces. April 1980 National Conference on Education in Yen Dung, Bac Giang Province. Concentrates on teachers' living standards. 1981 elected to the Central Committee of the Vietnamese Communist Party. 1982 to present elected Deputy Chair of Afro-Asian People's Solidarity. Org. Annexation. AAPSO. 1983 adjustment of salary scales for teachers. Introduction of seniority system and awards, People's Teacher and Merited Teacher. Decision to make November 20th Teachers' Day. Summer 1983 Sam's Son Statement on Education. 1984 establishes the Education Services Company. December 1986 Vietnamese Communist Party's V. A party Congress promulgates its policy of renovation. Mid 1987 becomes Deputy Chair of the Party Committee for External Relations, President of the Union for Peace, Solidarity and Friendship, Chair of the National Assembly Committee on External Relations, lobbies for removal of U.S. embargo and sanctions. December 25th, 1989, husband Dinh Kang passes away. 1991, becomes Chair of Fund for Care and Protection of Children. 1992 to 2002, Vice President of Vietnam. Works in diplomatic relations, education, healthcare, judicial reform, and Vietnam's emulation and award system. 1994, visits West African countries. Meets Jacques Diouf of Nguyen Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. Opens up cooperation in agricultural production between Senegal and Vietnam, and then with other African countries. 1995, attends Summit of French-speaking countries. Meets French President Jacques Chirac. 1997, Vietnam hosts the 7th Conference of the French-speaking Nations in Hanoi. Chairs the conference meetings. 1998, Honorary Chair of the Agent Orange Victims Fund. April 2001, presented with the Ho Chi Minh Medal, the highest award in Vietnam. August 2002, retires from state positions. April 2003, to present Chair, Vietnam Foundation for Peace and Development. January 1st, 2004, to present Honorary Chair, Vietnam Agent Orange Victims Association VAVA. January 30th, 2004, VAVA sues 37 U.S. chemical companies on behalf of Vietnamese Agent Orange victims. 2006 until present Chair, Phan Châu Trinh Couteau Foundation.